Welcome to the first webinar of the Home Gardens for Resilience and Recovery Network, HG4R, in 2021. My name is Tilman Brück. I work at ISDC, IGZ, and the University of Greenwich, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. First, a little bit of advertisement. Just before we start, I would like to point out that we have a parallel project called Life with Corona. It's an online data collection, and if you have a bit of spare time after the seminar, I would really welcome if you could check out our website at lifewithcorona.org and take our online survey. The project records and collects real-time data on the social and economic impacts of COVID-19, and we have 27 different survey languages, so we can collect data from around the world. If you're interested in the insights gained from the project, you can find that on our website as well. It'd be lovely to see you there too. Now, on with the Home Gardens for Resilience and Recovery Network. It's an initiative funded by the federal government of Germany. Our project website is at isdc.org/project/HG4R, and it brings together a whole range of actors, both practitioners and researchers from around the world who are interested in the role of home gardens in emergency settings, both for building resilience of people and also overcoming emergency in the recovery phase. So looking at home gardens beyond a sort of traditional income generating and food generating and employment generating tool, the specific needs in emergency settings, which I think home gardens are usually well placed to provide. So a whole range of actors who share information and lessons learned in this network. And you're all welcome to join us, get in touch if you're interested, and to be put on our newsletter. More information on that later. Today, I'm pleased that we have two excellent speakers who will share their expertise with us. Oops, this is, now my screen went wrong. I apologize for that. How do I fix that? That's a difficult question. I hope you can see it again. Yeah. So apologies about that. First, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Marlene Roefs, who's an experienced monitoring and evaluation specialist. She has research and consultancy experience in poverty, food security, governance, and many other sectors. Methodologically, her main areas of expertise include survey research, M&E systems and frameworks, strategic planning, logic models, and evaluations. Marlene holds a doctoral degree in social psychology from the Free University of Amsterdam, and she has worked as a researcher, evaluation specialist, and consultant in South Africa for many years, for the international NGO SNV in the Netherlands, and since 2013 for Wageningen University. And a small fun fact about Marlene: she's one of the co-founders of the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. So she's also an institution builder, which is great. Second, and I need to move to that screen, we have Katherine Pittore. Kat is a nutrition and food security specialist at the Wageningen Centre for Development Innovation. She also has many years of experience in nutrition programming, in her case, in international development and humanitarian emergencies, building capacity, conducting research, and leading advocacy activities, working with a range of organizations, including Save the Children, Results UK, and the much loved Institute of Development Studies, our academic partner in many projects in Brighton in the UK. Kat holds an MSc degree in Public Health Nutrition from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. For the past 6 years, she has been working with multiple organizations, translating research into action and supporting effective co-creation of knowledge with partners. And fun fact for Kat as well, her first degree is from Wageningen University, which among its many famous alumni also includes Joss Whedon, who's the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the director of The Avengers. Now, I'm really looking forward to our presentation. Yeah, you have some inspiration and big shoes to fill there. So some housekeeping rules. The outline of what will happen: we'll have the presentation entitled Effects of Nutrition Income Generation Intervention in Omugo Refugee Settlement in Uganda, about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll then have a Q&A with all of you, and we will end at 3 p.m. Berlin time after 60 minutes, quite sharply. If you would like to make a comment or pose a question to the presenters, please use the Q&A feature. We'll moderate that, and we'll see the questions as they come in. If you have any technical questions about logistics or connecting or being in touch afterwards, please send a private chat to HG4R or email gwen@moyles@igzev.de. I just note that the talk will be recorded and will be posted on the HG4R channel on YouTube. So maybe the final announcement is that looking ahead, our next session of or next webinar, the HG4R network, will be on the 16th of March, again a Tuesday, same time, same place, so to speak. And there we will look at lessons from Nepal and Uganda with several colleagues from Scale and Mercy Corps and other organizations. So that should also be fun. At this point, I would like to hand over to Kat and Marlene, if you would like to share your screen now. I presume we have to stop sharing mine. Let me see if that works. So over to you.
Great, thank you for that very informative introduction. I even learned something. I did not know that fact about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So always educational. Sorry, so. Great, is that working? Yes. Perfect, so yes, welcome. Thank you for the good introduction. So you already know myself and Marlene. And we'll be presenting today the Nutrition and Income Generation Intervention, which we do in West Nile in Uganda. And also just to say, as maybe a starter, that I'm a native English speaker and I can go very quickly when I get excited about things. So if I do, just tell me and I will try to slow down. For the agenda of the day, I'll just briefly mention an overview of the project context, Uganda and West Nile in particular, an overview of the Nutrition and Income Generation Intervention, the evaluation of the project that we've carried out, our results, and then we have some conclusions and some discussion questions that we would like to pose to you, because we're very excited to have a big group of people also interested in home gardens in recovery. So just in terms of the context, a little bit about Uganda. Is there anyone actually from Uganda here in our group? Any native Ugandans or people that work in Uganda?
Well, if you are from Uganda, why don't you
Your hand,
let us know?
Yes.
Yeah, on the chat, we have one participant from Rwanda, not far away.
Yeah,
but let us know in the chat.
So some people from the region, so you may know. So Uganda is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa. And the government has a very comprehensive refugee response strategy in that refugees are allowed to come to the country, they're allowed to stay, and they're let to live in settlements. So these are not camps, they're allowed to leave. People can move to the city, they can move to other areas. They're also provided by the government and host community with a piece of land. So I think this is quite interesting. In other contexts, I think often in refugee settings, people aren't able to access land. But in Uganda, people are given a small plot of land, which is perfect for doing something like home garden interventions. So we sort of built upon that. This project that I will be presenting today is funded by the Dutch government. So they were interested too in sort of bringing in non-traditional partners into the refugee settlement. So we actually partner with East-West Seed Knowledge Transfer, which is it's the pre-commercial arm of a seed company. So we are trying to bring in sort of more research expertise and private sector expertise into maybe a more traditionally humanitarian NGO-focused context. So our project has sort of three main pillars that all work with each other. So we work on household nutrition. So we work with both refugees and host communities and support in vegetable and fruit production and awareness raising about the importance of good nutrition. And actually something else I should have mentioned in the previous slide with the Ugandan refugee response framework requires that we also, any project that works with refugees and in the settlement should also be working with the host community, at least 30% of the activities. So our project release is split between the two. We work in the refugee settlement and we work in the host community. We also work with commercial vegetable production. So farmers with larger plots of land are supported to produce, market and sell vegetables and fruits and legumes. And we also work with quality seeds. So existing local seed businesses that were actually established by a partner organization of ours, Integrated Seed Sector Development, are supported to produce and market quality seed for both refugees and host communities. And I'll tell you a little bit more about these different components throughout the project, the rest of the presentation. So just the theory of change. So basically we hope that all of these elements are integrated. So, you know, that we have this increased access to quality seed, but that's also broader than that. So, you know, we have the local seed businesses producing quality seed. We work with East-West Seed Knowledge Transfer, who also has quality seed, also to grow access to quality inputs and good agronomic skills. And this is sort of the underpinning that we hope will lead to improved production of home gardens. So small-scale gardens, usually in the settlement. And then this will encourage people to consume more vegetables, accompanied with nutrition education. We also work on the commercial side so that people produce larger quantities of vegetables for sale that will increase incomes at the household level that they can use to buy more nutritious foods for their families, and also increase the quantity of vegetables that are available within West Nile region. So just a little bit about the specific components, and we will be focusing more on the household nutrition and home garden side of that. Also, that's where our evaluation focused on. So the household nutrition home gardens, you see her on the right. This is one of the female farmers in the settlement in Omugo. So here we work on producing vegetables, fruits, a few legumes, for example, biofortified orange flesh sweet potatoes. We also work with some they call them narrow beans. So these are iron-rich beans. So we specifically look at more nutrient-dense crops as well as vegetables and a few fruits like watermelon. So these are small gardens. They're 5 meters by 5 meters. So these are people without very much land that is available to them. And we aim to grow 6 to 8 nutrient-dense crops per season. And then there are 2 seasons that we can grow in this area. And the way that we kind of work is that we have 80 key farmers, and these farmers are supported with all the inputs they need for their gardens, as well as ongoing agronomic skills. So they're given trainings, and they're also provided with support from a trained knowledge transfer officer 2 times a week for 2 seasons. So it's quite an intensive amount of support that the farmers are given. So we reached about 800 farmers through this model in 2020. We also accompany this with nutrition education. So in addition to teaching people how to grow the vegetables and providing them inputs, we have sessions run by community volunteers and nutrition officers to increase knowledge about nutritious crops, both within the refugee and host community. And these are linked directly to the home garden. So, you know, when you're harvesting it, then someone comes and teaches you, this is what you can do with these vegetables. It's also been interesting because we've introduced a few different types of crops that are new to the community. So for example, a green gram and some of the narrow beans are crops that were not previously eaten by the refugees. So this has been, there's also been an education element of sort of how to use these crops. We also train NGOs and other sort of healthcare workers on how to carry out nutrition education. And so we're aiming to also increase the sustainability. So to train others to carry out the types of trainings that we're doing. Some of the home gardens that we run are also at health centers, for example, ones run by Save the Children. So aiming also to target those for specifically being treated for malnutrition to have a much more direct link to the health sector. We also work on commercial vegetable production. So this is really in the host community. This is with people with much more land. So 25 by 25 square meter plots. And then farmers in the host community choose one crop themselves. Usually tomato, eggplant, onions, cabbage are popular in the area. And then they are also supported by East-West Seed Knowledge Transfer over 2 seasons to grow these vegetables commercially. They're also provided with very intensive training on commercial vegetable production. So Wageningen University is one of the leading agricultural research centers in Europe. And we have a group of trainers that actually travel out to Uganda and provide intensive training for a group of 27 agricultural extension workers and trainers at the local colleges, but also parts of our project. This was originally a sort of face-to-face training where they would go for a week and do it intensely and travel out to farmers' fields and conduct soil sample analysis. And then due to COVID, we couldn't travel there anymore. So this was half face-to-face and half online. So that's been also an interesting learning experience for us as a project to have to switch this training that's really hands-on and really with people that are, you know, out in the fields to something that's been online. It's been interesting for us as well. And we also look at sort of supporting farmers with knowledge about actual commercial production of vegetables in terms of making decisions about, how much inputs cost, whether it would be cost effective to, fertilize or not fertilize or buy seeds. So sort of the business side of running a commercial vegetable farm. And finally, we work on, like I've said, the local seed businesses. So we have worked as Wageningen University in Uganda for the past 8 years on a project called Integrated Seed Sector Development. And one of the key outputs of this project has been to develop basically a new classification of seed, which are these quality declared seeds. So this is sort of between, farmer save seed, so the kind of seed that a farmer would grow and just save and then replant year after year. And then at the high end, you have hybrid seeds produced by companies like East West Seed. So these are seeds that are produced by the local agricultural research extension system, and then they're propagated by local seed businesses who are given technical skills by ISSD and also supported by the Ministry of Agriculture. And we've actually been able to create a new classification of seed, which you see here, this quality declared seed. So this is something that is affordable, more affordable, but also that, we guarantee a certain quality of it. And that's been interesting. So we've had to do quite a lot of increased awareness raising because this is the type of seed that hasn't existed in the country before. So that's sort of the third element of our project. So now I will focus down on some of the more on the home garden side of it, but just so you understand a bit of the general context of the project. So we carried out an evaluation, and we did actually do in the refugee and host community. So far, we've analyzed the data for the refugees, so I'll present that now. So the evaluation focused on the effects of the intervention. And we had kind of a few key questions that we wanted to answer: the effect of the project on household dietary diversity, on food consumption score, and on the coping strategy index. We also wanted to know the effect of the intervention on the consumption of specific foods, and also the effect of the intervention on household production of food. So these were the key questions that we set out to answer. And we didn't actually develop a survey instrument ourselves, but actually we used one called Resilience Index Measurement and Analysis, or RIMA. So this is a tool developed by FAO that aims to quantitatively measure resilience. And the reason we did this was the team was actually about to carry out a RIMA survey in the same area. They had carried one out that you see here in 2018, and they were collecting a second round of data at the end of 2019. We were originally going to work with them directly and collect data, but due to a number of challenges, including COVID and the lockdown, we weren't able to collect data at that time. So then we collected data just after lockdown had ended in Uganda. So this was in June and July of 2020. But we did use the same team of enumerators and the same survey instrument that had been used. And yeah, I think it's interesting too. So the data that we collected also probably is affected somewhat, or we're not quite sure because we don't have it to compare to a baseline, but by COVID. So in Uganda, there had been a sort of full lockdown from about March until June, where there was no public transport, no gatherings, really restricted. From June, you were allowed to, there was some movement allowed, especially private vehicles, and we were allowed special permission to carry out our survey, but there was still quite restricted movement at that time. So in terms of our survey, we carried this out in the refugee settlement, in Omugo settlement. So Omugo's in northwest Uganda, and it's quite a new settlement. It's an extension of a previously set up camp, but the extension was only set up in 2017. So most of the people that are there have only been in the country, at least in this instance, for a maximum of 4 years. Many of the refugees we found do sort of live between Uganda and South Sudan and have been back and forth at other times. So we had an intervention, so people living in villages 2, 3, and 4, and collected data from 160 farmers. So 16 of those were these lead farmers for whom we gave them all inputs and all support, and we did the trainings on their land. So these were farmers that we visited regularly, as well as 10 associated farmers to each one of those lead farmers. So these were people that were given inputs, but they were not supported as intensely as the lead farmers. And then we compared them to controls. So these were people living in villages 1 and 5, also 160. And we tried to pick people that would have been like the lead farmers that we would have selected. So we tried to use similar extension or similar criteria. So we went with the people that selected the original lead farmers and said, if you were to start the intervention here, who would you pick as a lead farmer? And that included criteria that the people had a background in doing agriculture, that they were known in the community, that they had a garden that is visible from the road, also for the project visibility. So we tried to use similar criteria. So in terms of what we found, I gave the kind of key research questions. So we wanted to look, first of all, at the effect of the project on the consumption of specific food groups. So you can see here, we have the green is the control and the blue is the intervention. And we were specifically interested in vegetables, green leafy vegetables, orange fruits and other fruits. So the things that we promoted through our project. And yeah, one interesting finding was that this huge increase in orange fruit, which actually wasn't promoted in our project, which we found quite interesting. And we think actually this is linked to, we spoke to a colleague, the government of Uganda had a big project promoting consumption of papaya and mango and distributed a lot of trees. So we think that this may be sort of a residual effect. The nutrition education combined with another project promoted by the government may be the reason we see this large increase in consumption of orange fruits. The green leafy vegetables we found were basically the same, which we also think was because this is a very commonly consumed food in Uganda and in South Sudan, and something that people were already growing in their backyards. So while we did encourage it in our project, it's probably something that most people were doing already. So we didn't see a significant increase between the control and our intervention. Where we saw a big increase was in terms of other vegetables. Saw a significant increase there. And I'll get to this later. We also saw a significant increase in terms of the people growing them themselves. Another finding that we were struggling with is why we saw such a significant increase in cereal being consumed in our group. One idea that we had with that is that the WFP gives out rations that would be mainly cereals. It's possible that if you had less access to other foods that you would sell more of those and buy roots and tubers, which cassava is much cheaper and filling. So people might be selling their grains and buying cassava to replace it, which would be logical given what you see here. It could also be, and we've tried to find, but it's been hard, the exact timing of the distribution of the World Food Programme rations. So in terms of the other research questions we had, another was the effect on the actual production at home. So, we saw that people are consuming more vegetables, but are they actually producing more vegetables and more different types of vegetables? And that we found statistically significant differences in terms of the control and the intervention in terms of the number and types of fruits and vegetables, the volume produced, and the amount of income that is earned from this. So I think, this for us, sort of said the project is definitely impacting people's ability to be able to grow, produce, and consume vegetables, and in a statistically significant way compared to a control group. Sorry, didn't realize that was. And finally, we wanted to look at the effect of the intervention on household dietary diversity, food consumption score, and coping strategy index. So maybe a little bit about, so household dietary diversity is looking at the number of different foods that people eat. So it doesn't do anything about quantity, but rather it just sort of asks, did you eat fruits and vegetables? Did you eat grains? Did you eat legumes? And we found a statistically significant increase in household dietary diversity in participating households compared to non-participating households. We did not, however, see a change in the food consumption score. And the food consumption score, the difference with that is it asks what foods people ate, but then assigns values to certain types of food that are viewed more nutrient dense. Higher values are specifically given to animal source foods, milks, meats, other flesh foods, which we were not promoting in our project, and which likely the people in our project had a very similar consumption to those outside. Another interesting finding that there was no actual impact on the coping strategy index. So the coping strategy index asked people questions about how much they need to engage in specific negative coping strategies. So things like sending someone away from the house, skipping meals, replacing meals with something that is less favorable. And this is calculated, so there's a whole range of different strategies that people may use to cope with food insecurity in the household. And then these are ranked to get an element of cultural so sort of what is the worst thing that you could do in your culture, and then the next worst. And then, so this is all impacts the coping strategy index. And we actually did not see a decrease in negative coping strategies for participants in the house, in our project. So yeah, here's just a kind of a nice visual that a colleague of ours developed that gives the overall findings of our project. You know, how many people we've managed to train, some sort of, you know, interesting key overall findings. You know, found in the refugee community, we were able to produce about 30 kilograms of fruits and vegetables per farmer per year, which, given that, you know, they only have 20 or 5 by 5 square meters, I think is quite impressive. We actually have an ongoing piece of research with colleagues from plant research as well at our university, and they've been collecting data on the soil as well as samples from all of the crops produced, and they've sent that to a laboratory in Nairobi to be analyzed. So hopefully in a few months, we'll have data too on sort of how much nutrients are being taken by these different plants. And then what do we need to be putting back into the soil to ensure that we're able to keep producing that quantity of fruit and vegetables. So I think that will be quite an interesting finding and something that we could use to make this intervention more sustainable. We found that people participating in our project were 2 times more likely to consume vegetables, which I think is also nice, you know, that this is actually really leading to increased consumption. And that, you know, we really did see an increase in household dietary diversity. And I think, you know, one of the key points in where we're working is that people get World Food Programme rations, which is basically maize, sometimes beans, salt and oil. So anything that can be added to this diet is really appreciated because people have very limited overall dietary diversity. In the host community too, we saw significant increases. So we haven't analyzed that data yet, but we've found that productions of approximately 2,000 kilograms of fruit and vegetables per farmer, which is quite substantial. And we have anecdotal evidence from some of the farmers in that community that they're transitioning from the traditional crop, which was tobacco, to doing fruits and vegetables for both seasons in the year, which is, I think, a positive in terms of availability of fruits and vegetables in the region. And people are earning money from this. I think the average of 1.7 million Ugandan shillings, which is not as much as it sounds, but still impressive. So overall conclusions, yes, we saw a higher production of vegetables and fruits in participating households, and this does correspond with increased household dietary diversity. But we saw no effects of participation in the project on coping strategies. And we think this is plausible because, especially in the settlement, we did not focus on food security per se. We found the greatest predictor of people engaging in negative coping strategies was not receiving formal assistance. So this type of intervention with home gardens, I think, is really helpful for increasing dietary diversity, access to fruits and vegetables, but it probably needs to be accompanied by other interventions and access to other types of support in terms of, you know, to have grains, to have legumes, to have things that will really form sort of the bulk of the energy of the diet. So this can't be sort of a substitute for that, but I think it's a very good accompaniment. And yeah, we just had some sort of questions to pose to you as well, to sort of, you know, understand, you know, for us as well, as our project is ending in June of this year, we'd like to try to expand it, but we would also be interested to hear, you know, how do you think we could strengthen our intervention? You know, do you think that this approach is replicable in other situations? You know, I did speak briefly about Uganda having a specific refugee response. You know, if you don't get land, for example, and do you have, you know, other recommendations for us for taking this forward? So thank you. And yeah, open the floor maybe to questions or.
Very much. Sorry, do you want to come in there? Marlene, did you want to say something? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I saw many interesting questions popping up in the chat.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So just some technical comments. This is being recorded, this great webinar, and you can look at it on the YouTube channel of HG4R and ISDC soon. So we will upload it there shortly, so it will be fully available. Everybody can see it. Also, what we have done in the past, which I didn't say so far, is that if we don't manage to address all questions live here in the webinar, we will ask our guests, and I hope they agree to do so, to answer them afterwards, and we can share the replies also on our website. Yeah, so that means please do ask lots of questions. Even if we don't manage to address them all live, we will come back to you with answers to all the questions. If I may maybe just briefly ask, because it was in the chat, it'd be great if you can use the Q&A if you have a question. That's easier to sort. But there was a question in the chat asking if you have published your study already. Is there any report online yet, or will there be? That would be nice to know.
There will be very soon. It's to be sent to the publication desk, so it should be available shortly online.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Not quite there yet.
Okay, maybe you can share with us the location where people should look. We can also include that in the reply to the other questions later, maybe, yeah, so that people know where to look for it. Okay, that would be super. Thank you. And the other question, just pulling it out from the chat, and then we move over to the Q&A feature, is what if you could comment briefly on the nature of your food education sessions. Jane Sherman asked that, and she was curious to hear a little bit more about that.
So we had, it was a set of over the whole kind of growing season, different types of nutrition education. So everything from sort of the basics of what is, what are macronutrients and micronutrients, and then it would go through sort of, what is a diverse diet, how do you create one, what types of nutrients are available in different locally produced foods. We had a bit on sanitation. I will say that our nutrition education compared to others, as it isn't very health sanitation focused, we have some stuff around, wash your hands before preparing food and things like that. But it's much more focused on consumption of diverse foods, of introducing new foods, and then also elements of, how do you prepare different types of foods to preserve their nutrient value.
Okay. And Jane asked a follow-on question. Is there any way to assess the contribution of nutrition education to the results? Can you tease that out somehow, what the role of those sessions were?
Yeah, I mean, some of it, the area that we seem to see sort of as the orange fruits that we didn't expect to see, and we didn't promote any production of orange fruits in any way. And the fact that we saw such an increase in that was quite surprising. So we would guess, although we cannot prove that was linked to the nutrition education.
Okay.
But we don't have sort of explicit, ways to separate out, and at no point, everyone got the full package of intervention. We didn't give nutrition education to some and nutrition plus home garden to others.
Okay, all right.
Any suggestions on how to do a more perhaps qualitative assessment of that would be very welcome. So we are looking into a follow-up now. Now we have the survey data, so we will be following up with more in-depth interviews and some focus group interviews and so on.
Okay,
but
that might be a great way of figuring out the why and the how. Yeah, so yeah, okay. And there were some other questions around the online trainings, which is of course really interesting in this current COVID situation. What were the challenges you saw so far, and maybe some of the lessons learned? Asked Gatete Godfrey.
So for the online training, we were training a group of 27 knowledge transfer officers, agricultural extension officers, people from local institutes. I mean, the obvious challenge we faced was people's access to technology, but to be fair, that was much less than we expected. So we worked with a program called Talent LMS, which is an online learning management software, but it enables you to access all of the materials on your phone. And you only need to have internet once to be able to download everything. And then you can do it sort of on your own time and you don't need data or internet. So we found that, by using, most people have smartphones that we were working with. And by making the data not sort of an issue, we were able to have 21 of the 27 participants finish the training. I think there's still the element that we're still trying to figure out is how, because a lot of the training was really about, going out to the fields and, learning directly on the fields. And they tried to integrate, taking pictures of things on the fields, for example, and different homework assignments, but, how to translate that really hands-on experience into an online format. But I think everyone was actually quite surprised at how relatively easy it was to transfer to an online format, even for a group of people that you wouldn't say are very computer savvy or that have very good access to internet, for example.
That's very interesting. Okay, so I think it's an interesting example maybe of us experimenting with formats for engagement, interaction, training, etc., which maybe we wouldn't have dared to try beforehand or thought were difficult. And in fact, maybe it's an opportunity to reach more people because this is much more scalable than in person, right? So this is maybe something, maybe that would be one thing to consider in the future. How can this material be used again and again in different settings? Yeah, but if the messages are the same. Somebody asked if what the language of instruction were. That was from Ashoki Bose.
The language would have depended on if it was in the settlement or the host community. So we had a group of, so our local nutrition officer was Ugandan, and then we had community volunteers and they translated into Arabic or another indigenous language that I don't know at the time, but it would have been carried out in the local languages. So yeah, we weren't training in English.
Okay, thanks. Then a couple of questions around the types of seeds and plants that you promoted. What Willis Ochieng asked, what were the main challenges faced introducing new seeds into the community, and how did you deal with them?
I think, well, when we first started the project, we really worked with East-West Seed, and they were bringing in, very commercial seeds, things like eggplant, tomatoes, and the seeds worked very well. But I think there was a lot of desire from the local community for indigenous vegetables, sukuma wiki. There's one called spider plant, okra, other plants that were not available. And then we actually struggled then as a project also to get quality seeds for those to make sure that would germinate. And then in terms of introducing new crops, we actually found, for example, narrow bean, which is an iron-rich bean, caught on quite well because it cooks really quickly. And people actually tend to prefer it over the more traditional beans because it takes less fuel to cook. One challenge that we heard recently from our nutrition officer is that we were promoting a type of bean that people like traditionally eat the leaves from. So they weren't actually letting the bean ever develop because as soon as the leaves would come out, they would harvest the leaves and eat the leaves. So the bean was never getting sort of to maturity. So there was a bit of, nutrition, I guess, changing people's, if you want this to get to the bean stage, you can't eat all the leaves as soon as they're produced. Yeah.
Did you do any seed saving, Jen Brewer wonders?
In our project, no, we didn't promote seed saving. I don't know, probably it was done by farmers themselves. Some of the seed that we work with, East-West seeds, I mean, those are hybrid seeds, so there's less seed saving. But it could be an area, and I think the link with the quality declared seed that could be nice to move forward with a bit more in the future.
Yeah, and what would have been the link with local seed businesses? So Mohammed Rashid is wondering about that, and which seed businesses are promoted, and do they get any incentive somehow to engage with this?
So the local seed businesses are businesses, that exist. So we linked to 8 that were the most geographically close to the settlement. So the seed businesses are spread across West Nile, which is quite a large area. And then there were 8 that were closest. And I think, the incentive for them is that there's a huge demand. And I would say probably the greatest demand comes from institutional buyers. So actually NGOs that are running these kinds of projects, there are a number of NGOs, for example, promoting sesame as a key crop in the area in terms of selling for cash. And sesame was one that we linked to local seed businesses. So the sort of incentive for them is large institutional buyers. And it's also much easier for them than selling lots of small packages.
Okay, yeah. And just a small technical note, do you want to continue projecting the guiding questions? I understand that you would like feedback on that, on the other hand, we can't see you as well.
Oh yeah,
so,
I can. Let me
there's a
stop.
trade-off.
Yep.
Feel free to come back to those questions,
Yep.
but maybe, yeah, super, thanks. Okay, what about some of the sort of growing techniques people ask? You know, there's a range of questions actually, and we have a really lively audience. I really appreciate all your questions. Thank you so much. I'm having so much fun scrolling up and down. For example, Lami Dinatu asked, are there any climate smart gardening options in the face of global warming in this part of Africa? Likewise, several other colleagues ask about water use, and some vegetable growing can be quite water intensive. Yeah, so that's maybe two examples of questions about how to grow the vegetables.
Yeah, water has been key and a critical challenge that we face. This area of West Nile is very dry. The soil is rocky and doesn't hold moisture well. When we started our intervention, we made sure that we worked with the lead UNHCR water engineer, because we also didn't want to be promoting our intervention somewhere that we would be competing with people who needed water for their basic needs. And that part of the reason for where we ended up working are villages that back onto a river, for example, or where they have more abundant natural water resources. But water is key. We also did investigate through our learning plot different types of less water intensive gardening. So for example, sack gardening or container gardening. A colleague of ours was playing with vertical gardening. So we have two learning plots in the host and settlements, and we kind of play with different ways, different types of mulching techniques, different ways of growing vegetables. So we have been kind of experimenting with that throughout the project.
Okay, that's great. Then what about the sustainability of the project? That's another thread here in the discussion. Yeah, people are worried that there are many home garden projects and they sort of come and go. Yeah, and I think like your result shows, they have an impact, and that's great, but maybe it have a bigger impact and be more sustainable. And maybe after that we move to money, but just now in general terms, sustainability, what do you think the lessons learned were in that field, on that dimension?
I think sustainability is kind of a key question, and that's something we've been grappling with as a project. One of the challenges in the settlement is that people don't actually have access to buy many of these inputs. So there are no agro input dealers in the settlement that we work in. The closest dealers are about an hour's drive away in Arua town. So that's something, and we are trying to set up a kiosk, working with a local entrepreneur who will receive training to try to sort of set up a local seed business sort of vendor in the settlement to increase people's access. We've been working a lot with community volunteers, and I think for us, COVID was actually good in that respect, because already we couldn't go, we were going out to see the farmers at 2 times a week with our project, and then suddenly we couldn't, no one could travel anywhere. So then the knowledge transfer officers started relying on WhatsApp communication, on calling farmers, on training kind of key farmers, community volunteers to help push the intervention forward, to provide advice to other farmers. So already in this project, we had to start sort of thinking about, what can we do lighter touch? What can we do as we scale back? How can we build up institutions? We also did a lot of training, capacity building of local extension agents, people also at local universities, to try to increase their capacity to train others. But I, agree that the sort of overall sustainability of the project, especially in terms of access to seed and other inputs, especially in the settlement, is hard. I think with commercial vegetable production, less so, because people are, once it's commercially viable, people can afford to buy inputs. So, whether that's trying to commercialize slightly, that people can sell a little bit and then, buy inputs, but that is, something we're still grappling with as a project. Yeah.
Okay. In fact, you had the support to the commercial farmers, which are larger plots. Yeah. So that's an interesting perspective. That's not actually that common in a home garden project. Yeah. To look at the sort of more commercial, single crop on a larger plot of land. So I wondered if there's any learning across that, differences between these two modes. Maybe I don't know if you have any lessons there. If not, there's lots of other questions we can come to, but.
Yeah. I think it is quite different in that respect. I mean, I think one is that with the commercial plots, people are able to buy, they generate a profit, and then you can put money back into your intervention. And then we have seen very small scale, but a few of the refugees with very small plots were quite entrepreneurial and interested. And in Uganda, you know, because you're not sort of fenced off, some of the refugees that we worked with were able to strike deals with the people that they lived near their land and were able to expand. And we saw a few small scale projects. One guy had a bicycle and had gotten some land from his neighbor by offering to clear it for her. And she let him grow and maybe gets in exchange of some of the vegetables. And then he was selling tomatoes off the back of his bicycle in the refugee settlement. So I think, you know, there is, if you are able to access a bit of land, interest to sort of, you know, it's not commercial. I mean, very, very small scale commercial, but there is a bit of interest there.
Okay. In fact, this, of course, is one of the special features of your project, that you're looking at the experiences of refugees. And I wondered if you could maybe reflect on that a little more, and also maybe how transferable that would then be to other communities. I mean, it could be other, you know, this is a more remote part of the country, presumably. I mean, there is a little bit of excess land. That's also something people ask about, you know, including the quality of the land. Maybe the land that is available is less rich in soil or less good soil quality. Otherwise, it would be occupied already. Yeah. And it's a unique feature of the Ugandan approach, in fact, to the refugee situation, yeah, that they are offering to people to settle and so on. So just wondered, you know, how special a case this is, and or what lessons learned there may be from these aspects.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of what we've learned would be transferable to other remote areas where people have, you know, it is bad soil because it's the rocky soil that's not particularly fertile that people are growing in. Marlene, did you want to come in? Or?
Yeah, no, it's exactly, I think, what you're saying. Yeah, but what is really, you know, the question that we indeed have is how to make this more sustainable, and how to embed it in more locally initiated initiatives that for also for these refugee areas. I think that's a big question, because obviously a purely commercial approach will not work. I mean, we talk about refugee areas. It's not that it's so easy to have a business over there, and it's not a big market with assets and finance available. So that's the harsh reality. So what we have seen, that with fairly little inputs, very little costs, we can achieve a lot in terms of dietary diversity, in terms of topping up a little bit of household income, which is wonderful. And I think really we need to, what we should do is to really look a bit more into with what kind of means can we actually achieve what we have seen up to now. And we need to do some more qualitative research to get a better understanding of the dynamics behind the results that we have shown this afternoon.
Yeah. In fact, I think you'll really enjoy going through the, you know, still 50 plus unanswered questions later after the webinar, because there's so much food for thought. And I really appreciate, please keep posing your questions in the Q&A, but I can only very selectively quote from them. Here's a question from Isabella Vera, who asked, did you encounter any doubt or resistance from refugee beneficiaries with regard to agriculture seeming like a more permanent intervention against what many may hope is a transient or temporary crisis situation?
In the area that we work in, I think many people don't often view it as very temporary. A lot of these refugees actually had lived in Uganda in the past. So many that I had spoken to, they had South Sudanese that had come to Uganda. Many of them had actually grew up in Uganda, went to schools there, went back to South Sudan when it settled down, and then have since come back. And many now sort of say, this is permanent. I will stay here now. I don't want to go back and forth. So I think in this context, where people come back and forth quite often, there's less of that sense of, and you know, because often I think people too view the communities as quite similar on one side of the border or the other. I think we did ask about people's intents to return. Don't remember the exact data off the top of my head, but I don't feel that it's so strong that people think this is very, very temporary and I definitely want to go back as soon as possible.
Yeah. Did you connect people to the market then? Like, you know, did you, even if it's only very small plots and very little, but, you know, sometimes refugees can be a little connected from the local market. So whether it's on the input or the output side, actually, yeah. And so reducing the access to markets, reducing the barriers to access to the market may be helpful. Yeah? Is that something that you found as to be a topic or worked on?
Well, with the refugees, we didn't. I mean, we found people were marketing, but only within the settlement. I think actual physical transport is one of the key challenges, but people definitely do. I mean, you see them, women walking between the two, especially into the host community, into the settlement. You know, there is a market in the settlement where people sell things to each other, and I think people come from the host communities to do that as well. So yeah, we didn't actually, because we were focusing much more on home production, really work on facilitating market access per se. Also during COVID, because people couldn't travel at all, that was particularly difficult. And that was actually a problem more for our commercial farmers who couldn't access markets either. Well, and that was, you know, they have a lot of vegetables and they can't just eat them. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to now go to the money side, as several people ask about the cost of this. And could you maybe just visit that briefly? You know, what's the sort of, do you have any numbers on unit cost, or you know, how expensive such an intervention is, or if other organizations want to replicate this, what lessons would there be?
We haven't done sort of a cost per beneficiary analysis. The overall project is 1.5 million euros over 2.5 years, which covers the cost of an office in Uganda, which has about 11 permanent staff that work on the project. So we have a team of about 6 knowledge transfer officers, a nutrition officer, a quality declared seed officer, an agronomist, project managers. And then we have a team from plant research that supports temporary, like, you know, going back and forth. You know, I imagine that this could be done, especially sort of some of this, you know, was about the research and proof of concept, could be done for less. But it would be interesting for us to calculate the, you know, sort of exact cost per beneficiary, especially once you sort of remove in the research elements.
Okay, thank you. There may be, if this is slightly jumping, could have had that earlier, but African indigenous vegetables and versus more Western style vegetables, what did people want and what were you able to provide to them?
So for indigenous vegetables, we provided, a range. We struggled in the start to get them. So originally East West Seed, as our partner, was providing their vegetables, which are field crops, and they're suited for the tropics and semi-tropics. So the company is actually based in Thailand, so they really focus on, you know, tropical crops, but they are more kind of commercially oriented than in Western crops. And then we tried to integrate more with the second and third season indigenous vegetables, but we did struggle to get quality seeds for that. So in the first season, I think we got a whole, tried to do okra, which is very common in South Sudan. And they planted a whole field of it, and it didn't, hardly any of it germinated. So we struggled to get access to some of these seeds. But in the end, we were able to get, spider plant, sukumwiki, okra, a number of sort of more indigenous, nutritious vegetables as well.
Okay. Yeah, and then the other thing is that some studies elsewhere show that you can get an increase in production, but what's sort of a bit unclear is how people use that, even very small scale farmers, home garden users, that you know, they might sell it for a little bit for extra cash, or they might eat it themselves. Even the distribution of the food within the household might be unclear. So that it could be conceptually that you see an increase in the home garden production, but you don't see an improvement in the dietary diversity of food consumption scores. Just wondered what you know, the sort of in terms of the theory of change, the last bit, you know, getting people to actually consume. What's the best way to get them to do that? What's the lesson learned there?
I mean, like you said, we didn't measure individual level household dietary diversity. We did see an increase in consumption. So I do think that final stage was there. And I think that nutrition education was key to that. I also think in the refugee settlement, you know, people have less access to markets and very limited supply of foods that they get. So any sort of effort, and this is what we've heard from colleagues as well, to any ways to diversify diets are really appreciated. more so maybe than in other contexts where people could more easily access markets to sell products, for example.
The intra-household, dynamics, we definitely like to look into, as a follow-up study, a bit on the targeting. Yeah, many malnourished people who were sent actually by Save the Children to participate in the home gardens. Were part of this project. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think in the settlement there was quite a strong focus on mainly women who came from the health centers and required better diets, better food. So there was a focus on it. But on intra-household dynamics, we really need to look into that.
Yeah, my colleague Hassan, who's co-hosting this here with me, and I and colleagues, we've done studies where we have seen that very small and modest home garden interventions can really boost the role of women if that's a deliberate part of the programming. Yeah, so that's and in fact, we have some very pertinent comments in the chat as well. Yeah, so that's also, I think, maybe an interesting topic for the future. Yeah, so I think you asked the audience several questions, and I think you have several answers there, what to look for. Yeah. We have 2 or 3 minutes left. I'd like to give both of you a chance to, or each of you a chance to have the final word jointly between the two of you. We've covered at great pace and high speed many various interesting insights from your interesting study. What has stayed in your mind? What would you like to say at the end? What is the message you'd like to convey as we close?
I've got it on now. Well, I think to me, when we started this, I didn't have such high expectations. I must say what I see, what NIGI has been able to achieve is really significant, and the feedback that we get from people in the field, from refugees and from international development organizations active there and within in the host community, feedback that we get is extremely positive, and people want this to continue and even to scale up. So we were really looking into, well, how can we do this, and how what are really the elements that we then should also be focusing on when we would try to replicate or scale up, or what are the key interesting and successful dynamics that we have been able perhaps to trigger. And I would really like to get also your feedback on this, and it would be wonderful if we can continue this discussion, and we have some more time to look in your questions and comments as well. And to make use of the various insights that we have around this very rich roundtable sort of, or screen.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the sustainability and scaling, I think for me are kind of the 2 key questions. One thing about our project is that it was very intense. We had knowledge transfer officers supporting farmers, twice a week for 2 seasons, and it takes a lot of effort. I think it really works. We got a lot of positive feedback from others who said, other NGOs came, they gave us some seed, and we had half a morning training, and we didn't really know what to do with anything. But now we really see what we can do. And I think that intensity is useful, but I think, is it sustainable, is it scalable? And I think, figuring out that midpoint, what is enough training that people can really do it and they feel supported, and that if they have problems, they can get support with that, and how do we embed that locally? I think these are all, really interesting questions to sort of look at moving forward.
Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of these questions stimulated my thinking as well. So thank you very much for those, everybody.
Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen to formalize that. It should say on the screen now, thank you for joining. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a very active discussion. I think the most active we've ever had here in the webinar series. So well done also to our presenters, Katherine and Marlene. I really appreciate that you took the time to share the very interesting lessons. Some of them may be provisional to the extent that it'd be great to go back, and you said there'll be more qualitative research, which I think is excellent, to dig a bit deeper. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to my co-organizers, Gwen and Rassan, for making this possible. And I look forward to see you all again Tuesday, the 16th of March, 2 p.m. Berlin time. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.